Alberta Premier Danielle Smith says she's not the one calling for Alberta to separate, but she's moving ahead with legislation to make it easier. Meanwhile, chiefs are calling her rhetoric insanity and an attack on First Nations. For more on this, our Truth and Politics panel is here. Jennifer Laewetz is the CEO of Paskwâw Strategies, and Niigaan Sinclair is a columnist with the Winnipeg Free Press. Jennifer, Niigaan, thanks as always for being here. Niigaan, we'll start with you. And the Premier of Alberta saying this week that this is not what she wants, not a conversation that she wants. She's not in favor of separation, but it's the people who want to say. Your thoughts on what the Premier is saying?
Well, she may not want to actually separate, but a vote for separation is absolutely something that is in her best interest because she wants to distract from the scandals that she is mired into involving firing healthcare workers, being mired up and mixed in with the Trump administration. She absolutely wants to distract from this and capitalize on Alberta discontent involving the results from the federal election. She could have shown leadership and stepped up and said, well, you know, a Canadian election is a Canadian election and Confederation is Confederation, but she didn't. What she's interested in doing is gaining political points from what is a dissatisfied Alberta electorate. You cannot write a question in any way, shape, or form that doesn't have a central focus in its core, which is that when you remove Confederation from Alberta, you therefore remove the Crown and all land reverts back to First Nations. You can't just simply do that. And also Canada has to protect Indigenous rights and treaty rights, and Alberta has therefore the obligation to act within the Constitution. The Supreme Court tells them that they have to follow Canadian laws. Even if they wish to separate, they have to follow Canadian laws in which to make that happen.
Jennifer, even the party, the United Conservative Party itself, had voted down this kind of talk at their last convention. Again, the Premier says it's not her bringing it up. So why is this being discussed, do you think?
I think people are really frustrated from the results of the election, and I think that this is her way of maybe capitalizing on that. And, you know, I saw this post online that said that Danielle Smith had said it's not her job to stoke the flames of separatism and stuff like that, but that's exactly what she's doing. And granted, she's saying, oh, well, it's not me, it's the people. But sometimes in leadership, you have to take those strategic decisions on how to lead and to maybe, you know, decrease the tensions right now. And if they were talking at convention about not bringing this conversation up, then as the leader of that party, it's her job to make sure that doesn't happen. But I think there's a lot of people that are frustrated right now and forgetting that, you know, Danielle Smith is not going to be the Premier forever. That is a province that has went Conservative to NDP and back and forth. So I don't know if they think that they're going to be in power forever or what the plan is there, especially for separatists that are now like, oh, I want to separate. Well, what does that look like under a potential NDP government in Alberta as well? You don't just get to pick your leader and that's your leader forever. So.
Niigaan, you spoke a bit about this last week, but the chiefs from Treaty 6, 7, and 8 held an emergency meeting this week in Edmonton. They say this rhetoric is insanity and an attack on First Nations. What do you think about their message?
Yeah, it's also illegal. Canadian law says the Supreme Court has said, you know, if you want to talk about separation, that's fine, but you have to talk to First Nations first. And the difference between now and the first 80, 90 years of Confederation is we have lawyers now, and therefore that negotiation will take a considerable period of time. So Alberta, you better get moving if you're interested in separation. You better talk to First Nations and talk to First Nations meaningfully, because the land will become theirs. And so just to pronounce that you're interested in separation isn't really about separation. What it really is it's about trying to take a wedge issue, and we know Danielle Smith has done this before, taking, for instance, LGBTQ2+ kids, pointing out, saying, oh, they are deluded, or they shouldn't be in schools, or they shouldn't have operations on the lower half of their body, even though they never even had those in the first place, and that was an illegal action. She uses wedge issues like this all the time. This is exactly right out of her playbook. And so we shouldn't be taking this separation discussion all that seriously, because even if there is a referendum, it just will be absolutely illegal, or as the chiefs say, insanity.
Jennifer, how do you see this all playing out?
I think if the conversation continues, then we're going to see a big fight ensue. You know, the Chiefs are absolutely correct, and people are criticizing them right now, but they're doing what they should be doing, and that is defending not only their citizens but treaty rights in general. And some of these chiefs are not new to these fights. Chief Sheldon Sunshine was one of the first out the gate to issue a letter basically saying like this is not happening. But that same chief was the one that was saying, last year in committee talking about our inherent right over water. So this is just another day, another fight for a lot of these chiefs who know that they have to show up and they have to say something. But at the same time, I think if this rhetoric isn't died down soon, then we're going to see it's going to get ugly.
Niigaan, switching gears, Mark Carney at his first press conference announced that King Charles and Camilla are going to be coming to Canada in a rare move. King Charles will open the 45th Parliament of Canada. What's your take on that?
Oh, it's all about posturing. It's all about performance. And most of all, it's also a little bit of an appeal to Donald Trump's kind of base, what he likes the best, or what his kind of ways in which he sees government operating. Donald Trump is a big fan of the monarchy. I think perhaps he'd like to become a monarch himself. And so I think what he's most interested in, engaged in, is trying to think a little bit about some of those things where you don't have to face things like elections or democracy. And so the monarchy works quite well for Donald Trump. And so Mark Carney's being very savvy here, bringing in not just the representative of the crown, also our representative involving treaties, which is a bit of a tip. I mean, it's First Nations who always demand the Governor General be present at those meetings in which we have meetings with the government. But it's also a bit of a savvy poke to Donald Trump, a reminder that Mark Carney has a much bigger connection at play, the British Commonwealth, and that there may be some other things that Canada is interested in doing and talking to Europe, especially involving trade.
Jennifer, this is going to be the first time in decades that a reigning monarch will read the speech from the throne in the House of Commons. Your take on why the Prime Minister is taking this step?
I think just to change up the vibe, if you will, of where Parliament has been. We haven't heard a lot of conversation around the monarchy in Canada for a while when it comes to the Trudeau government. So I think this is essentially us seeing a shift in our approach. And at a time when we almost need to be having that conversation because, Donald Trump has undermined our sovereignty as Canadians and as First Nations people at the same time. And so I think this is almost Prime Minister Mark Carney's way of saying, like, it's not just Canada you're going to bat with. We are under a monarchy and our king is on his way. So I think it's interesting. I'm not a huge fan of the monarchy for obvious reasons, but at the same time, I'm like, I'll watch because it is kind of interesting. So.
Moving to other colonial systems and structures, I guess, Niigaan, a new pope was selected today, Robert Francis Prevost from the United States, the first pope ever from North America. Your initial thoughts there?
My initial thoughts are this is quite a menu of topics this week. We've got Danielle and then King Charles and now the Pope. I'm not sure, is this APTN anymore? What are we talking about? Anyways, I'm being facetious, of course. All these things are related to our people and the relationships between our people, and probably no more important relationship than the Catholic Church to our people. It was survivors who demanded, called upon, asked very kindly to have the Pope come to Canada in July of 2022 and offer an apology on behalf of the Church for residential schools. And so Indigenous peoples undoubtedly will be caring a great deal this week or today that there is white smoke coming from the Vatican, which indicates that a new Pope is here. By all indications, there is a genuine concern about whether this Pope represents a regressive move or a progressive move. I've had sources within the church tell me that it would be very difficult to turn the church back years. However, I don't have a lot of faith in that regard. I would say that the proof will be within whether this Pope from America, where we know where Catholics, many Catholics, are quite back in the ages of women belong in kitchens, marginalized people, particularly two-spirit people or gay people, are not practicing Christian or correct or civilized behavior. We know that within the American South, Catholicism is very much a old school tradition, very rich, stringent, very based in social conservative, banning people, for example, who have look differently than others. I hope that this Pope, at the very best of times, acts like how Jesus, or listens to Jesus, which is that Jesus said that everyone matters. Jesus would wear an orange shirt. Jesus would believe that everybody should be treated fairly. And I hope that that's what this Pope does, because I know for certain Pope Francis headed the church in that direction. And many in the church resisted that, but knows that that's the only way to have the church survive.
Jennifer, I know it's just breaking here, but your initial thoughts on Pope Leo XIV, an American, and what it could mean for Indigenous peoples?
I was surprised to see that it was an American, and I've been kind of just watching the news back and forth as it's been going on. But I think there's a lot of unanswered questions and still some healing on the First Nations side that is still going to make this relationship a little bit tricky. And I'll be interested to see how this Pope communicates his thoughts around not only the history of Catholics with First Nations people, but his take on all of it, and even in modern context and politics in the United States and in Canada, as Niigaan was saying, there's a lot of those social conservatives that are very heavily Catholics as well, and there is still that undermining and that disregard for even Two-Spirit people, which I saw on Twitter yesterday was happening. So I'll just be curious how this Pope mitigates that.
Niigaan and Jennifer, we'll leave it there for this week. Thanks to you both.
Thanks.
Thanks.